Welcome everybody, welcome all our Torah Anytime viewers and listeners. So we're discussing today, Be'ezrat Hashem, this is going to be the final part of the three-part series on the hidden story of Matan Torah. Now we spoke about what happened in the previous two classes, of what happened until the days that were coming up until when God is going to go and give the Torah to the Jewish nation. Today what we're going to be speaking about, Be'ezrat Hashem, and this is the final day. This is the day that God gave the Torah to the Jewish nation. So until this point, there was 26 generations that went on from the beginning of Adam HaRishon all the way until the Jewish people went and accepted the Torah. And the way that how important this day was, how important that this day goes, and it changes everything, it changes the world forever, is that if the Jewish people wouldn't have accepted the Torah, then the world would have been destroyed. Meaning that the sake of the world was for the Torah. This is what the Gemara on Shabbat, page 88a says. And furthermore, Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin brings down in Nefesh HaChaim that the entire earth, if the entire earth from one end to the other end would be idle even for one moment on Torah study, then the world would be destroyed. But not only the world, the upper world and the lower world, everything would be destroyed. Everything is found, the foundation of everything is the Holy Torah. And if we wouldn't have accepted the Torah, then the world would cease to exist. Us or anybody else, somebody needed to go and accept it. The Midrash in Shir HaShirim goes and compares this to the pasuk and Shir HaShirim, where there was a rose amongst the thorns. That's what the Jewish people are considered. Sort of like there was once a king, and he wanted to build this magnificent, beautiful garden, and he put with it figs and grapes and pomegranates, and then he handed it over to his caretaker to go and take care of it. And this caretaker went and didn't take really good care. He deserted it, let it grow. After a while, the king comes back and sees that there's weeds growing everywhere, there's thorns, everything is like completely messed up all over the place. He's like, what is this? He's like, I can't use any of this stuff. And he went and he hired like a crew to go and starting to just like clear it all out. And as the king is walking through the garden and the people are going and clearing things all out, the king sees one beautiful rose that's like sticking out over there. And he's like, whoa. He's like, oh, hold on a second. He looks at the rose, he looks at it, smells it, he's like, you know what? This rose is so beautiful, so amazing. Because of this rose, I'm going to go and save the entire garden. I don't want the entire garden to be destroyed. We're going to build the garden again from this rose. There was 26 generations from the beginning of creation until now. These generations were not generations that were following the way that God intended it. You had the generation of Enosh with idolatry. You had the generation of the flood, which unfortunately was erased with water. And all of a sudden, there was one rose that stuck out. And that is when the Jewish people said, Na'aseh v'nishma. When the Jewish people said, Na'aseh v'nishma, I was like, oh, this is so beautiful to me. For the sake of this rose, God said, for the sake of the Torah, for the sake of the people that studied the Torah, the entire world will be saved. And when was the Torah given? The Torah was given on the holy day of Shabbat. Shabbat Kodesh, that's when the Torah was given. Now, when the Torah was given, the Jewish people were actually, when the day came, the sun was rising and the Jewish people were sleeping. And God had to go and wake them up. The Moshe Rabbeinu told them and urged them, he said, listen, he says, on this night, which was Friday night, stay up, don't go to sleep. And people thought about it, be like, you know what, if we go to sleep, then we'll be fully rested. If we stay up, we might not be fully alert. So it's better that we go to fall asleep. And unfortunately, they fell asleep, and says the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, they slept 2 hours into the morning. And what does this compare to? To when you have a king that makes declaration, says, I'm coming to this country in a certain date. And everybody, should, obviously get ready. And then the king arrives and everybody's sleeping. Like no one's out to greet the king. There are no signs, no posters, no people going there and greeting the king. So the king's messengers and entourage, they go and they run around, they play the trumpets, and they go and they make some noise and they knock on people's doors and says, what are you doing? The king is waiting, the king is here. How come no one's here to greet him? All of a sudden, we go back to our story that, God, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, comes into Har Sinai, and everybody's sleeping. So what happened? God sent messengers, and things started happening. Mountains started shaking, trees started falling. There was a display of meteorological, disturbances that were going on. Significant things were going on. And then this came the sound of a shofar. The sound of shofar was very different than anything that we've ever heard before. This is usually human sounds. They start off strong as they go weaker as they get along. That's a human sound, because as you blow, you lose more air from you're exhaling more air from your lungs, so your power is less, and the sound goes lower and lower. But the way that this supernatural shofar went is that it started off low and it kept on getting louder and louder and louder and louder and louder and louder, and it kept on going. One of the reasons was was that God, in his infinite kindness, he didn't want to subject the people to the full intensity of the sounds right away. So instead, what he did is that he began softly, and then they became accustomed, they became adjusted to it, they were able to go and hear it. Now, once the Jewish people realized that it's a spiritual sound, they started getting really, they started trembling, they started getting, afraid, this fear, this trepidation that they had. So you picture the scene at this point in time. The Jewish people are sleeping, right? And all of a sudden there's like mountains shaking, trees falling, meteorological disturbances. There's this shofar that's getting louder and louder. And all of a sudden they just they just wake up. And they got so disoriented from the sounds that, they were sort of like paralyzed with fear. And it reminds me of a time when I was, in my house, in my bedroom growing up, was right next to the alarm system. So I don't know if they still do this nowadays, but the olden days, growing up, the alarm system, there was a speaker on the outside of the house and there was a speaker on the inside of the house. The speaker on the inside of the house was right next to my bedroom. And I remember this, there was a time where the alarm went off. Birds, I don't know what went into the screens, or I don't know what the reason was. Irrelevant, but whatever it was, the alarm went off in the middle of the night. And I was a little kid, and I remember, all of a sudden, the alarm goes off, and it's I heard it in my brain. And I just jumped out of bed, but sitting up, and then I just froze. I didn't know it. What does this do? Do I run? Do I sit? Do I hide? You're sort of paralyzed with fear. Where there's suddenly you're awake, and you're you need a moment to get your gatherings and bearings together. Over here, the Jewish people were sleeping. And all of a sudden there's shaking stuff, and things are falling and crashing, and there's thunder and there's lightning, there's all these things, and there's a loud shofar. All of a sudden the Jewish people wake up and they freeze. They're like, what are we supposed to do? Oh no. And then all of a sudden they start thinking, they're like, wait a minute. Yesterday we said Na'aseh v'nishma, but right now, I don't know if it was such a good idea. Look, we could get killed over here. There's trees and everything falling down. All of a sudden Moshe Rabbeinu goes and says, listen, there's nothing to fear. But we shouldn't be keeping the God waiting. Let's go. We have to hurry up and get it to the mountain. Now, even though the Jewish people overslept, they still were eligible to receive the Torah in the merit of the forefather Yitzchak Avinu, who went and woke up early for the Akedah. And just as a side point, look how amazing it is that when you go and you have a test and you pass a test, that test affects your children. It doesn't just affect you. Yitzchak had a test, and he went and he woke up early to go to the Akedah to get basically slaughtered. And what happened over there from that merit, that ended up helping his not his children, but his great ancestors. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu goes and tells them, going back to our story, there's nothing to fear. There's only blessing for those who stand at Har Sinai. And in fact, anybody that came to Har Sinai that were, let's say, sick from any physical, mental, emotional disabilities, whatever it was, they were healed. Now, nobody could say that because of any issues that they had, they couldn't come, they were sick, they weren't feeling well. Everybody was completely healed. And not only they were healed physically, but they were also healed spiritually from any spiritual, defilement that they had. We know that when the serpent went and forced Chava to eat from the tree of life, that what happened was that this was sort of injected within her a zuma, a spiritual defilement, and this passed on to all humanity. The way that it was is before Adam and Chava sinned, the forces of evil were external. They were outside. They still had a free choice, but the free choice that they had to do a sin is put your hand in fire or not. Of course you wouldn't do it, but you could if you want to. So the evil inclination was outside and was put your hand in fire. Be I don't really want to. So that was the level of sin. Do the sin. Oh, no, I don't really want to. But then when they did the sin, when the Nachash came and convinced Chava, and they went and eventually Chava convinced Adam to do the sin, so this Zuma went inside, literally went inside of her. And look at the Gemara in Shabbat, page 146a. So what happens is that this caused a great confusion. Now the evil inclination was no longer external, now it was internal. It was part of, part of her, a part of all mankind. Now when the time for it came from when God healed everybody, God also healed the spiritual aspect of this. Now the spiritual defilement, the evil inclination was no longer internal, it was external. The rest of the nations of the world, they still retained it in the internal, but the Jewish nation, it moved to the external. Now, not only they received this type of gift of healing and spiritual cleansing, but also they were on such a level that they received the gift of immortality. They were never supposed to die. And not only that, there would be freedom from any poverty, diseases, any other troubles. They gained complete freedom from it. Even though you could ask, if they were free from all these troubles, all the death, then how come the Torah speaks about death? You could ask, what's going on over here? If it doesn't exist, then why was the Torah given that there's death? And the answer is that there were certain sections, these sections were given conditionally. If the Jewish people did not sin, then they would have lived, forever. But because they said now they're going to go and they're going to, they go back to where they were beforehand. Now, unfortunately, with the sin of the golden calf, the sin of the Chet HaEgel, this is where the Zuma, this is where the defilement returned, and this is where all the curses of Adam HaRishon, and they had to go and they had to work and they had to go and to go through death and so on and so forth. However, even though the Jewish people sinned and they lost the immortality of their own personal being, but there was still a collective immortality, meaning that the Na'aseh v'Nishma, that God said the nations will never ever be able to exterminate Israel. Israel, the nation of the Jewish nation, will always live until the end of days. The blessing that we can see over here is that the Torah is the cure for everything. The source of everything is the Torah. Like people think that, I live as a whatever it is, as a person. I'm a man. I go to work. I learn a little bit. I'm a Jew. But I do everything regular. So people think like the ikar, the main thing is that I do my life, and I do my work, and I do my family. I do all that. The secondary thing, I happen to be a Jew. It doesn't work that way. The source of everything is the Torah. And that's why the Torah would have been, the whole world would have been destroyed if the Jewish nation wouldn't have accepted the Torah. Everything is the foundation of the Torah. So the Torah is the ikar, Torah is the main, everything else is the tafel, is the secondary. So, when the world was shaking, and the Jewish people are finally up and they're making their way towards the Har Sinai, the world also felt the shaking. The world also saw these sounds and heard all these things. All of a sudden they ran over to the person that they thought would be able to answer them. And they ran over to Bilam. Bilam was a prophet. And they say, what's going on over here? Is God destroying the world? He's like, no, God's not destroying the world. It's like, are you sure he's destroying it? He destroyed it. Maybe he's sending a flood like he's done it before. So Bilam says, no, God promised that he's never going to send a flood again. So maybe the people answered, that's referring to a flood of water. But maybe he's going to destroy us with a flood of fire. Maybe he's going to destroy us. So Bilam says, relax. It's not a flood of water. It's not a flood of fire. The reason why there's so much noise and the reason why there's so much commotion is because God is giving the Torah to the Jewish people. So something interesting that happened over here. You think about it as such a crazy situation where God is coming and giving the Torah. So wouldn't everybody be interested in being a part of it? But the second that they go and they realize, wait a minute, it's for the Jewish people, it doesn't affect me. They knew that if they would go and they would accept the Torah that has some sort of restrictions on their life, they weren't interested in it. And even though the world was shaking, it looked like it was going to be destroyed, and they were nervous, they ran over. But as soon as they heard, oh wait, it doesn't affect me, no, it's fine. I don't need to worry about it. When the coronavirus was in China, okay, no, people didn't worry about it. All of a sudden it comes here, now everybody's worried about it. You walk in the street and you see somebody picking a fight with somebody, across the street. Unfortunately, New Yorkers, what do? You look the other way, you don't say anything, you don't do anything. Not saying that's the right thing, I'm not saying what you should do in that scenario, and don't take this the wrong way, but when something is not affecting you, you don't really bother with it. If all of a sudden this person was picking a fight with you, then things would change. You call 911, you call this, you do whatever it is that you can. But people, sort of feel, if it doesn't affect me, I don't have to deal anything. I sit back, relax, it's not affecting me. And this is, unfortunately, this is how the nations of the world, they saw it. They saw that, there's so much commotion going on, there's so much craziness going on, but the second that they realized it's not for them, it's not going to affect them, it's not for, they're like, you know what, then we're not interested, and they went back to their regular life. Now, the people started assembling, the Jewish nation started assembling around the foot of the mountain. The actual giving of the Torah took place at noon. In the middle of the day. Now what happened was, when the Jewish nation suddenly went and they assembled around the mountain, all of a sudden the mountain itself, the miraculous thing happened, that it uprooted itself. It uprooted itself, and it rose, and it went on all over to the heads of the people. Now, what happened was, usually when you see like a mountain coming up, and you run the other way, you just get out of there, whatever it is that you need to do, you don't want to be anywhere near that. What's this mountain all of a sudden just picking itself up? But what happened was that they saw this mountain go up, and it started expanding in circumference. And they understood what God was doing. God was going to put this all over the people. So instead of running away, the Jewish people actually clustered together to go under the mountain. And God goes and says like this: if you go and you accept the Torah, then everything is fine. But if you do not accept the Torah, then here is going to be your burial place. I'm going to put the mountain down on you, and this is where you will be buried. And the Jewish nation says, yeah, no, we accept it. We accept it. So God says, no, it's not enough that you're accepting it. I want guarantors. I want guarantors that could guarantee your commitment and that's going to be genuine. So the Jewish people go and say, okay, fine, the Avot, the holy Avot, our patriarchs, they're going to go and they're going to be our guarantors. God was not satisfied with that. No, I don't want the patriots, no. Let's not the patriarchs. Let's try to find somebody else. They go and they say, okay, fine, the prophets and the Nevi'im, our holy prophets, they're going to be our guarantors. And God said, no, not satisfied. And then the Jewish people says, you know what? our children. Our children will be the guarantors. And God says, that I accept. I accept the children to be your guarantors. But it's not enough. We got to ask the children. God goes to the children that were born, the children that were not born yet. And he goes and he says, will you be the guarantors for your parents? And the children said, yes, we will. Maybe we could say here a chidush, beautiful chidush. We know that before Mashiach comes, we know it says in Malachi chapter 3 verse 23 and verse 24, it says before Mashiach comes, he's going to bring Eliyahu Navi, is going to come. And what's going to be in that day before Mashiach comes? The hearts of the fathers will be turned back, will come back to the children. And we see that nowadays. Before Mashiach comes, we see over here that the children are becoming more religious than the parents, and they're bringing the parents. You look at the Kirov world, you look at the Tshuva movement, it's so amazing that you have the children becoming more religious, and they're bringing the parents slowly back to Torah Judaism. And the question is, like, why would that be? Like, it's so, we see it, but it makes absolutely no sense. It should go the other way around. It doesn't go that the children bring that back to the fathers. It should be the fathers go and teach the children. It's something very backwards. And this is something that we spoke about before, but maybe we could start connecting the dots over here. Why is it the children are going to bring back the parents? We see over here that on Matan Torah, the children were the guarantors. God goes over and says, do you guarantee that that your parents are going to be, keep the Torah? And now that the children are saying, yeah, we're the guarantors, and now we're seeing that we're getting close to Mashiach, we're going close to the end of days. So now all of a sudden the clock is running out, all of a sudden the children are trying to bring back the parents, come back to the Torah. Why? Because we are the guarantors, we have to go and bring you back. Once the Jewish nation goes and accepts the Torah, the guarantors were in place, all of a sudden the mountain goes and goes back to its place. Now there's a very good question that you can ask. When God goes over to the other nations and he said, do you want to accept the Torah? God never put a mountain over the head. So the nations could come over to God and says, listen, we didn't accept the Torah, but you never forced us. If you put a mountain over our head, we would have also done and accepted the Torah. So they have a good question on God. So God, what would a Kadosh Baruch Hu answer them? He says, listen, the Jewish nation, they already said from the beginning, Na'aseh v'nishma. They already said yesterday that we will do and we will listen. It's not, and now I put the thing over their head, the mountain over their head. But you guys even denied it even from the beginning. It's two different things. If you would have said yes from the beginning, fine, then you had a claim. But the Jewish nation said from the outset, from the beginning, that we will do and we will listen. Na'aseh v'nishma. Then leads us to a question, so why did God do that? What was the purpose of all this? If God is, if we already accepted it, and God said we already accepted it, then what's the purpose of putting a mountain over our head? And the answer is something fascinating, something amazing, based off a pasuk in Devarim, chapter 22, verse 29. It says that if a man goes and forces himself on a woman, he is required to marry her and stay married for her forever. He can't decide that he wants to divorce her. We're not going to speak about if the woman wants to divorce and, if she wants to leave and so on. So we're talking about from the man's perspective. Because he went and he forced himself upon a woman, he's required to stay married to her forever. So what did Hashem do? God went and forced himself onto the Jewish people, sort of to commit to him, so that his commitment will endure forever. Meaning that even if the Jewish people transgress the laws of the Torah, they do averot, they don't follow the Torah, God cannot say we divorce and we'll choose a different nation. God put a mountain over our head, forced us into compulsion to going and saying that no matter what you do, I can never leave you. I am stuck with you. So while the mountain for our head was for our benefit, everything's for our benefit, but here we see how beautiful it was that God put us in a situation over here, in such a situation that we would be sort of stuck and we could never leave, but from the other side, from God's perspective, God, no matter how far we fall, we are always connected to God. This is related to a mashal, a parable. There was once a princess, and she reached, age to get married. And the king went and tried to get her all the best, the highest nobles and the highest people that from the highest class, and princes from other kingdoms, and one after another. She says, not interested, not interested, not interested, not interested. So the king didn't know what to do. One time, the princess is, riding along the country road with her entourage, and she notices there's a peasant over there. Peasant that's wearing ripped clothing, doesn't even have shoes, walking barefoot. She pulls over a little bit over there, and she starts asking him some question. And she sees how he answers her with grace and humility, just like amazing the way that he composed himself. And she was so impressed with this person. And she goes back to the palace. She goes to her father and she says, Father, I found my zivug. I found the shidduch that I want to go and get married to. And she tells the father, this particular person, and so on and so forth, this peasant. And the father's like, what? You want to marry a peasant? You have all the highest level. You picking somebody from the lowest level? Why? You have so much. No matter what the king tried to convince her and to argue with her, there was no use. She made up her mind. She made up her mind, and she wants this person to be her husband. So the king says, fine, what could I do? I tried. He goes and he sends out messengers to go and collect this peasant, bring him to the palace. So the messengers go, they find this peasant, and they go to him and they say, listen, the princess, she wants to go and she wants to marry you. Do you accept to be her husband? And he's like, to marry the princess? It's unbelievable. Of course I accept. And then for a second, he's like, wait a minute. He's like, why would she want to marry me? Like, I literally have nothing to offer for her. Like, I don't have any power. I don't have any fame. I don't have any money. Like, what is she coming to me for? And then he started to think, you know what? Like, maybe the reason why she wants me is she wants to control her husband. So if she gets somebody at a high level, an aristocrat level, another prince, she knows that she, like that person is going to hold very highly of himself, and she's not going to be able to control him. But how could it be easier? You find some sort of peasant, you get married to him, you control everything you want. He's like, listen, do I really want to marry somebody that will be, yeah, I'll have fame, I'll have money, I'll have power, but I'm going to be suffering in a marriage. Like he was like, wait a minute, I don't know if I want this. And then he's thinking, but wait a minute, but maybe she really wants to marry me for who I am. And he's going back and forth, and he says, you know what? Let me, put a sort of test and see what is her real purpose, what is her real reason for getting married to me. So he goes and he tells the messenger, says, listen, he says, I thought about it. I do want to marry the princess, but I have certain conditions. And he's thinking, if she goes and accepts the conditions that he's going to put in, then he knows that she'll accept him for whatever, and she really wants to marry him for who he is. But if he starts putting conditions, and she's like, what? You're putting conditions for me? I'm the princess. You can't give me conditions. I give conditions to you. Then he would know that all she wants is control. So the messenger said, fine. They went back to the palace, and the messenger, this peasant goes and meets the princess and says, listen, I'll get married to you, but I have X, Y, and Z conditions. And the princess is listening, and she says, yeah, absolutely, that's fair. Of course, whatever it is you want, I want you to be happy. You're going to be my husband, whatever it is that you want, you'll get. So all of a sudden, the peasant goes and says, wait a minute. So the princess actually really wants me for who I am. So all of a sudden, this like heavy stone rolled off his heart. He's like, okay, now I'm getting to something true, something good. Now we go back to our story. The Jewish people were offered the most amazing Torah. The famous statement that they said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. But then a day passed or two passed, and they had time to think about it. They're like, wait a minute. We made such a commitment to the difficult Torah. One deviation from it, maybe God will go and strike us down. The world was shaking. They woke up. All of a sudden, they're frightened. They're stuck in their beds, and they're sitting over there like, what did we just do? Like, God, there's trees falling down. There's a loud noise. Did we just mess up? Like, one mess up that we do, one mistake that we do, God is going to destroy us. What did we do? They hesitated. They reconsidered over here. So what happened over here? God raised the mountain over their head, and He gave them another opportunity to this time to accept it without any reservation. Meaning that until now they went and they were like, okay, maybe we'll accept it, maybe not. Now all of a sudden, God is giving them another chance. And all of a sudden they're like, wait a minute, another chance? We could have another chance? We could go and accept the Torah again, this time without any reservations? So like we could do a do-over? All of a sudden there was, the concept over here of tshuva was opened up to them. There's a door of repentance, meaning that even if we mess up, even if we fall short, we could still come back. So that's what God was doing. God, they said Na'aseh v'nishma, and then they got scared in their beds, and they woke up. They started thinking, wait a minute, what did we do? God wanted to fix all that. Wanted to come to the Torah fully accepted in it. So He put a mountain over their head, meaning that hey, you could decide again. You could decide whatever it is that you want. So all of a sudden they saw that they had the ability to redo stuff. They had the ability to do tshuva. Then all of a sudden they went and they accepted the Torah fully. There's other additional reasons that the reason why God put the Torah over their head before they go and they accepted the Torah, before they went and they got the Torah, was that originally they accepted the Torah, everything was good, everything was nice, everything was dandy, everything was great. So they said, okay, of course we'll keep the Torah out of love when everything is good. But God said, you also have to keep the Torah when the times are difficult, when you're under duress, when you have a mountain over your head. Are you going to still keep the Torah now? So the Jewish people say, yes, we'll keep it even now, keeping it when it's good, and we'll keep it when it's difficult. The Chassam Sofer also brings down that the Jewish people reached a level of angels. They reached a level of angels. So to the point that an angel is stationary. An angel is a very, very high spiritual being, but they can't go up and down. They're stuck. They're stuck to where they are. So the Jewish people may have thought, listen, we reached a level of angels. Maybe we're stuck where we are. Maybe we won't be able to reach a higher level. Maybe we won't be able to grow even higher. So God put the mountain over them, says the Chassam Sofer. Why? To teach them that you're still capable of reaching a higher level. You could still capable of climbing higher, even though that you are on a level of an angel at this point in time. Obviously, when they did the sin of the Chet HaEgel, it went down a little bit. But at this point in time, they were such a high level, they were capable of reaching even a higher level. No matter where they were, they still could keep on going higher and higher. I told Moshe Rabbeinu that you have to go now and warn the people. What are you going to warn the people that they shouldn't go, and they shouldn't go into the into the mountain. They shouldn't go close to where the mountain is. So Moshe Rabbeinu stops for a second and he says, "Wait a minute. I have to go and warn the people. Again, we warned them a few days ago. They've been already warned 3 days ago. Why do we have to warn them again?" So says Rabbi he goes and he says that what did God answer Moshe Rabbeinu? Lech red, go and descend to warn the people. Well, what does it mean? Says Rabbi Moshe Rabbeinu was on such a high level. He was on such a high level that he goes and he says, I don't understand. We already warned the Jews a few days ago. And in his high level, if you tell him something once, that's it. It's going to happen. Like, why would the Jewish people need to go and be warned a second time? They're already warned before. So what did God say? God said, lech red, meaning go down from your level, from your high level. You have to go down. You have to go down to the level of the people. Just because you have such a high level that if something was said a few days ago, you're going to stick to it and nothing's going to change, doesn't mean that everybody is on that level. And this Moshe Rabbeinu here was taught by God how to be a true leader. If you want to be a true leader, you have to realize that there's variance in your group. Each person, you have to relate to them as an individual level. And don't think just because you reach a certain level that everybody else is on that level. And this unfortunately happens to us when we go, and let's say we raise ourselves to a spiritual level, and we look at other people and be like, wait a minute, this person is still doing X, Y, and Z? How could they do that? And we look at them with, disdain and disregard to their, to who they are as a person. And like, we can't judge them. We don't know. We're not on the level. We didn't go through their, struggles and their, personalities, their trials and tests that they had to go. We weren't part of that. We cannot go and say, just because we are the way we are, that everybody has to be that same way. Everybody has to be dealt with on their own level. And some people need to be warned twice. So God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, go and warn the people twice. So Moshe Rabbeinu goes, and also another reason is that, people, when you're in the back of the crowd and you want to see something that's in the front, so what do people usually do? They push or they try to move around to go and get to the front of the line. So maybe inadvertently, even though they were warned, maybe now they're going to push themselves up to the front and they're going to, go over the boundary that they're not supposed to. And in fact, the Mam Laws brings down that even the boundary itself, the boundary around the mountain itself, that itself warned the people not to go, close to them. Now, as the time was getting closer for the giving of the Torah, there was a mysterious, like, purple, vapor that went down that smelled, like a roll, like it's just like smelled beautiful, and enveloped the entire mountain, like sort of like a purple mist. And there was the Anan and the Arafel clouds that they spread across the entire heavens, and all of a sudden the day was plunged into like a deep shadow. And God tells Moshe Rabbeinu that when you come up back into the mountain, I want you to stop halfway in the mountain. Don't come all the way up. And one of the reasons is that, if God is going to go and start giving the Torah to the people will suspect, maybe you are going and you're the one who is actually talking to them and tricking them. But if you go halfway to the mountain, then the people will see that you're stuck over here and the voice is coming, or God is speaking from up the mountain. They would never suspect that you're actually going and pretending to give the Torah, and it's actually coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Moshe Rabbeinu goes and brings this, instructions to the people. Now, the way that it worked when when God created the world, the divine presence was originally supposed to be on the, in the world. Now, what happened is that when Adam HaRishon made the sin, so he went and the Shekhinah removed themselves from its earth and went up to the first, heavens. And then when Cain did, a sin, it went from the first heaven, it went to the second heaven, the Shekhinah. And then when Enosh did the sin, it went from the third level to the fourth level, and then the sin of the flood, went to the fourth. The Tower of Babel went to the fifth. The sins of Sodom went to the sixth, and finally the sins of Egypt in the time of Avraham Avinu, it went to the seventh, heaven. The sort of the Shekhinah, after all the generation, the heavy sins of the generation, it kept on raising itself from the earth, basically from the world, and moving up to higher into the heavens. Now what happened was, when Avraham, when he came in and he did all the mitzvot and all the kedusha that he brought the Shekhinah down from the seventh to the sixth heaven. And then you had Yitzchak, he brought it down from the sixth to the fifth. Yaakov from the fifth to the fourth. Levi brought it from the fourth to the third. Kehat went and brought it from the third to the second. Amram went from the second to the first. And Moshe Rabbeinu was able to go and bring down the Shekhinah to Har Sinai. And when the Shekhinah went and descended onto the mountain sort of like lifted itself up again, sort of like a servant running to greet its master. And sort of you saw like the heavens and the earth, they were sort of like coming together. And what the Jewish people saw is that at this point in time, the seven heavens, the seven parts of the heavens, they all parted, and they saw the glory of the Shekhinah. And the Jewish people also saw there was 22,000 chariots of angels that were clothed in fire, that were accompanying one side of the Shekhinah, and they held in their hands the crowns. These are the crowns for the Levi'im. And one of the reasons that the Levi'im specifically got these crowns is that they would not go and worship the Egel, the golden calf. Now, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu went and he opened up the heavens, and what they saw at this point in time is they saw what even Yecheskel and Yeshayahu and Navi did not see. And the Zohar brings down in Parashat Yisro that the Jewish nation was able to see as one can see light in a glass lamp, with the light that this same type of light that the prophets Yecheskel, which was such a high level prophet, was only able to see behind many coverings. So they were able to see things that no one else ever saw before. And what they were also able to see is that God sort of like opened the heavens, and they were able to see that there was no one else other than God. They saw that God was alone. And here is where we can start beginning, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu started speaking the commandments to the Jewish people. Now, until this point in time, there was a lot of noise, there was shaking, there was, things that were happening. But when God started to speak, the world was silent. Not even birds chirped. There was nothing. The entire world was silent. The world sort of like stopped. And just before God gave the Ten Commandments, the Jewish nation went and they said, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And Moshe went and concluded, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. At this point, God began to say the Ten Commandments, and started with the first one, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am Hashem, your God. What is it? And what happened was over here is that the people, when they heard God speak, they recognized it at the same voice that they heard, the same sound that they heard before when Moshe was speaking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when God started speaking the commandments, there was something very fascinating that happened. That even before God uttered the words, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am Hashem your God, the beginning of the Ten Commandments, God spoke all 10 commandments in one shot, like in one sound. Now this is impossible to understand because we can't even comprehend that. But God sort of said all the 10 commandments simultaneously. And people, cannot hear multiple sounds simultaneously. So they heard it sort of a muffled, indecipherable, like sound. And then God went and repeated the 10 Commandments. And the Ramban, Nachmanides, writes that the Jewish nation heard the entire 10 Commandments from God, but the first two they understood as a level as Moshe Rabbeinu understood. And the Rambam argues and said they only heard the first two and they didn't hear the other 10. But regardless of whatever it was, when the purpose of going and bringing all the commandments at one time, even though they wouldn't be able to understand it, they wouldn't be able to comprehend it, it was so that the Torah should be learned that it's a whole. It's not something that you could deal with half and half. It's not something that it's, you could take you could take part of it or you could take another. No, the whole Torah was given in one shot to show you that it's one. You can't pick and choose of what you want. Another reason is that it would be impossible that the Torah was given any other being other than Hashem. Why? Because not even an angel could go and utter the 10 commandments in one shot. The Or HaChaim goes and brings down that the first commandment represents all positive commandments. And the second commandment goes and represents all negative commandments. Now, when God spoke, the voice of God was divided into 7 different voices, sort of to parallel 7 groups that were among the Jewish nation. You had the elders, the Zikanim, you had the youth, you had the unmarried people, you had the children, you had the infants, you had the women, and then you had Moshe Rabbeinu. And God provided each one according to its abilities and strengths. So for example, and this is similar to the way that the man worked. For a pregnant woman, they heard in a very soft, gentle, voice, not to cause them any miscarriage or any terror that would cause them any trauma to the fetus. And each person, they heard they sort of understood, not heard, they understood the Torah according to their knowledge, which means is that it based on how they prepared. If someone prepared a lot, so they learned it, let's say, it's sort of like in a Talmudic, logical analysis type of understanding. Other people, on a lesser level, they only learned it at the literal sense. Other people, just like through the level of the laws. People that really prepared also were able to go and learn it through the deep Kabbalistic mysteries. So it all depended on the individual's spiritual preparation to the day of when the Torah was given. That's the level of how the person went and was able to understand things when God spoke to them. Now, these 7 sounds, the commandments, when it was given by God, it was translated into all 70 languages, that the Torah will exist in all languages. So in the future, to all Jews, no matter where they live and which language they would speak, the Torah was available. Now, when the Jewish people, they heard the sound, so it appeared that it's coming from one area. So they sort of won over to one area and to try to listen to it better. When you hear a sound and you want to even though you hear it okay, but sometimes you want to get even closer to the source of it. So let's say they saw it coming from the south, so they started going to the south to try to hear it. But then all of a sudden, as they got closer to the south, the sound appeared that it was going the other way. It goes from the north. So they went closer to the north. And when they got to the north, it appeared that it was coming from up. And they would try to look up and it appeared that it was coming down. Wherever they went, the sound was coming from a different direction. And one of the purposes and the reason for this was that God wanted to teach the Jewish people that God is above the concept of makom, of place. God is everywhere. Not over here, not over there. So you don't need to get closer, to the mountain to go on one side or another side. Everywhere was exactly the same. And wherever you think that you're getting better, it would sound like it's going from the other angle. And, usually when you're speaking to a large group of people, then some people have difficulty hearing, some people are further, some people are closer. Here, everybody heard, there's no difference. No matter where you are, you heard it exactly the same. You heard it, the elders, the men, the women, the children, they all heard it, no difference where they were. And not only the people heard it, and they felt it and they saw it, but rather every single Jewish soul. The Chazal tell us that even from that passed away, even that weren't born yet, even that were there, present right there and now, every single soul was present on Har Sinai. Every single soul, and they were able to go. And this is not only the souls, but everybody they were able to see the sound. Something that was very, very fascinating. That when God spoke, sort of the words formed into letters. And it sort of rose high. I can't even picture it. I try to picture it, maybe it's fireworks, but it's not even that. You can't even picture it. But sort of it was the voice that came out from the Shekhinah was sort of it was like a fiery sparks that formed into letters. And these letters rose high into the sky, that everybody was able to see that. So for example, from the first word of the 10 Commandments is Anochi. So the Aleph, Nun, Chaf, and Yud, they all went into with fire in people's eyes, near people's eyes in all directions. And even when somebody tried to grab it, it sort of eluded their grasp. And also Hashem was demonstrating that He was everywhere, not above, all over the place. It existed. So it's something it's very hard to actually visualize. And what happened is that as the words left the Shekhinah, as the words left the mouth of God, so to speak, they went like shooting stars, and they became engraved into the tablets that Moshe Rabbeinu was holding. And each commandment, when God spoke, took the form of an angel. And this angel was, each angel went over to a particular Jewish person, and it says, do you accept this commandment? And they said, yes. Do you accept its laws, its penalties, its reward? And they said, yes. Do you accept all the 248 commandments corresponding to your limbs and organs? And they said, yes. And do you accept the 365 prohibitions that's compared to the days of the solar year? And they said, yes, we do. And this is the pattern that followed each successive commandment. God went and had an angel go, and each person went and said, yes, I accept it. Now, when the Torah that the Jewish people learned like this, it was remained in their minds forever. This you don't forget that. This is something that stuck with them forever. Now, the problem is that they were so scared at this point in time. We were so scared that the bodies and the soul were shaking. It was literally shaking. And some even suggest that the reasons, sometimes when people are learning, they shake back and forth. They shuckle back and forth when they pray and they learn. One of the reasons it was customary based off what happened when in Har Sinai, people were so nervous and they were just shaking back and forth. And that's why it's sort of our souls connect to the shaking back and forth. So all of a sudden you're having all this, scared, like voices and fire and all this stuff that's going on, all of a sudden people were like, wait a minute, was it smart of us to go and say we want to hear the Torah directly from God? Because that's what they went to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu went over to them and says, do you want to accept the Torah? And they, a few days prior, they said, yes, we'll accept it, but we want to hear it directly from God. They said, maybe it wasn't so smart of us to do that. Look what's happening over here. Look how scary it is. So the strong ones, the spiritually strong ones, they were still so scared that they went and they retreated. They went to the back. And it's sort of like the people in the back had to make more room for the people in the front that were running to the back. And then you had people that were weaker than those, and they just fainted on the spot. Then you had the weakest of all. They actually went and they passed it with the souls left their bodies. And this is what Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says. At each utterance that left God's mouth, the souls of the Jewish nation departed. It's sort of like they died. They died. The souls went up to heaven. And what God did is God lowered the dew. There's a special dew that's destined to be for the resurrection of the dead, for Tchiyat HaMetim. And God brought the dew down, and they came back to life. And this happened for the first commandment and for the second commandment. Now, you would think that somebody that died twice and came back to life, twice, and went through this traumatic experience, you would have some sort of residual effect on the body, on the soul, but it had absolutely no ill effect on them. In fact, it had a positive effect on them. That those people, that they never suffered after they died, they never suffered any infestation of any vermin. The corpses remained free of worms. But still, the Jewish people, after the receiving of the second commandment, they went to Moshe Rabbeinu and said, Moshe Rabbeinu, please, beg God to stop. We can't do this. It's too much for us to die and to get back, to die and to get back. It's very tiring, very difficult. So they said, maybe it'd be better that you tell us, God will tell you, and you tell us whatever we need to learn from the Torah, the commandments, the rest of the commandments. And furthermore, the Jewish people said that it will help us in the long run. Because if we ever, God forbid, transgress something of the commandments, we'll be punished so much more severely if we heard it from God. But if we heard it from you, then the punishment will be less severely. And Hashem called Moshe Rabbeinu and says, you should know the Jewish people are right. That if they hear it from me, the punishment will be more severe. But if they hear it from you, the consequences will be less as severe. So Moshe Rabbeinu goes and says, not a problem. He tells the people, he calmed them down. He says, it's not a problem that you went and you heard the first two. Don't feel bad. What did we do? We shouldn't have done that. God wanted you to hear the first two commandments directly from him. Why? Number one is that this will make you, this fearsome experience will make you an exalted nation. It will raise you to a higher level. And additionally, it will humble you. It will humble you. And one of the ways to acquire Torah is through humility. You want to acquire, you have to be through humility. And by the way, it's not only Torah, even in relationships. If somebody works on humility, it affects everything, especially the relationships, because you won't be upset every little thing that happens. So it's so important to work on humility. God says you want to go and learn Torah, you have to be humble. So this experience is a very humbling experience. Death is a very humbling experience. And also, this is also why there was thunder and lightning, there was noises right before the Torah was given. Why? Because it sort of freed the mind from anything else. It gives you the proper mindset of accepting the Torah. And also, they enjoyed here a special prophecy. They heard God. They saw the heavens opened up. They saw here what even the greatest prophets will never see. This is one of the reasons for this, is that if there will be ever come a proclaimed prophet will ever come and say, hey, by the way, these events that happened on Har Sinai never took place, you should know that it's a false prophet. Why? Because you are there. And finally, for the final reason that we're going to discuss tonight, is that God knew that in 40 days the Jewish people would worship the golden calf. And the Jewish people could say, you know what, if God didn't speak to us, meaning that if God would have spoken to us, we would have never gone and done the sin of the golden calf. And now that God, didn't speak to us, maybe that's why we sinned. So God didn't want them to use that as an excuse. So God went and he spoke to the Jewish people. So now they can't say, oh, you know why we went to sin with the golden calf? Because we heard it from you, Moshe Rabbeinu. How did we hear it from God? We wouldn't have never done it. So now they heard it from God, and now they asked to not hear from God, to go and hear it only from Moshe Rabbeinu, and God, agreed with it. So God goes and says, now we're going to go through Moshe Rabbeinu. So Moshe Rabbeinu was by the bottom of the mountain. The angels Michael and Gabriel went and they took Moshe by the arms and they sort of brought him up to the mountain, sort of like flying like a bird. And he went over there, and when Moshe, the way that Moshe received the rest of the commandments is the Jewish nation also heard it. And the way it worked was it was sort of like they heard God say, Moshe, go tell the Jewish people such and such. And Moshe Rabbeinu went and told the people such and such. So even at this point, the Jewish people still heard it. But now the question is Moshe Rabbeinu is standing there on a mountain, and he has to speak to almost 3 million people. How you're talking about a span that's over 8 miles long. No matter how loud your voice is, it's not going 8 miles. No matter how quiet it is, it can't reach that far. So what happened over here? That God sort of gave a boost to Moshe Rabbeinu's voice, that it reached even the most distant Jew. They could hear him clearly. And now that Moshe Rabbeinu is now going and he's giving them the the commandments, the rest of the commandments, Moshe is acting as an intermediary. All of a sudden, people are like, wait a minute, what did we do? Like before we had it given by God, and now, if God would have given us Torah, it would have been stuck in our hearts and our minds forever. It says, what did we do? Why did we ask Moshe Rabbeinu to do it? So now they're sort of like flipped back. They changed their mind. Moshe, we want we want God now to give to us. And Moshe Rabbeinu, at this point, it's too late. But don't worry, you're worried right now. Why? Because you're going to learn the Torah from me, and it might go and get you to forget certain things. If you would learn it from God, you would never forget. But now you have a possibility of forgetting. But don't worry, whatever you learn will always be with you in Olam Haba, in the world to come. So this is how the commandments went, and it was finished. It was finished at mid-afternoon. And here God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, let them go back to their tents and resume regular existence. Now, the Jewish people are bound by dietary laws, and they came back and they were like, wait a minute, they didn't have any meat dishes that were properly kosher. So they couldn't really eat the meat stuff. So what do they have to do? They only are able to eat dairy dishes. And in some opinions, this is one of the reasons that there's a custom to eat dairy food on Shavuot. Moshe Rabbeinu, he remained on the mountain. He remained speaking to God, and Hashem gave him another message for the Jewish people, and that was that make sure that the Jewish people understand that they did not receive commandments secondhand on Mount Sinai. They themselves heard it. They all heard it, and they all saw it. They were there. The Torah is given without any intermediaries. Even though Moshe Rabbeinu was an intermediary for some of the commandments, they still heard what God said. Moshe, go and tell them such and such. So there should be no doubts, no reservations in the Jewish people's mind. And God goes and says they have to be very careful not to make any images, any statues, any other representations of me in order to serve me. There's no intermediaries. If you want, directly to God. You don't need any middleman. You go directly to God. You want to pray? Speak to God directly. Now, Hashem went and gave him, taught Moshe like civil laws governing interpersonal relationships, and this is what's outlined in Parashat Mishpatim. And then And then what happened was, after Moshe Rabbeinu went and told this to the Jewish people, Moshe Rabbeinu went back to the mountain, and this is where he was going to be gone for the next 40 days, where he was going to go into Shemayim. Now I want to finish off with one thought, and that is the Midrash in Bamidbar Rabbah brings down that the Torah was given with three things. It was given with fire, with water, and the desert. And the question is, why all these things? So number one is, just like fire, water, and desert are all free, so too Torah is free. You don't have to, it doesn't cost anything to learn. It doesn't cost anything to study. Everything is free. Another reason also, particularly for fire, is that Rabbi Yitzchak goes and says that why was the Torah given, amidst fire and darkness? Because that one who devotes himself to Torah is delivered, is saved from the fire of Gehenom, the fire of hell. And the Shemesh Shmuel goes and brings down something so beautiful. You have to stick with me for a little bit on this one. The Shemesh Shmuel goes and says that a person is comprised of three primary constituents, and that is, you have the guf, the physical body, that's the body. Then you have the two non-physical parts. One is the sechel, which is the intellect, and then you have the nefesh, which is the emotional aspect. So you have the physical, the intellectual, and the emotional. Now, the Torah was given three things: wilderness, fire, and water. Let's go through each part and see how it relates to each different part of the constituents of that comprise a human being. The wilderness lives alone. It's not in contact with any civilization. This corresponds to what? To the intellect, which is the brain sits in the head, separate from the rest of the body. Also, what's also separate is what goes on in a person's head. A person's intellectual makeup, a person's thought process is different from everybody else. So just like the desert is separate from humanity, from civilizations, so to the brain, the intellect is separate from civilization. And this is referring to the intellectual aspect, the sechel. Then you have the fire. The fire is the enthusiasm, that encourages one person to act. This is the fire of the soul. This is the fire of the nefesh, the emotional aspect of that fuel the person. And that's the emotions. That's the nefesh. And finally, water is something that represents the physical element of man. And the way that the Shemesh Shmuel goes and explains this is the way that the Maharal, he brings down the Maharal, and he says that every object is described as either chomel. Chomel is raw substance, and then there's tzura, which is actually the form of the substance. So an example, wood is the raw substance, a chair is the final form. So wood is the chomel, and the chair or the books or the bookcase, whatever it is the tzura, is the form. Water is the most unchanneled chomer. It's the most unchanneled form. It goes, because when you pour water on something, it forms whatever vessel that you put it in. So the aspect of physicality, that is represented by water. A human body is similar, is like a undeveloped, a chomer, undeveloped raw substance. What gives the human body substance? That's where the soul goes in and gives the physicality some substance. So we have over here the fire, the water, and the desert, all correspond to either the intellect, the emotions, or the physical aspect. So the wilderness is intellect, the fire is emotion, and the water is the physical. Now the Gemara in Chagigah, page 6b, goes and says, Rabbi Akiva says the Torah was given in its entirety at Har Sinai. That's time number 1. Then it was repeated in the tent of meeting. It was repeated again twice. This is by the Mishkan. And then it was repeated again by Arvei Moab, in the plains of Moab. Now, let's break up these 3 things and how they correspond to the intellect, the intellect, the emotions, and the physicality. The Mishkan, let's start with Har Sinai. Mount Sinai was primarily an intellectual acceptance of the Torah. This is symbolized by where was the Torah given? In the desert, in Har Sinai, in the desert. So what was it? This is corresponding to the intellectual acceptance of the Torah. Just like the head is separate, so too the desert is separate. That's an intellectual aspect. That's where the Torah was given. The Mishkan was a place where it was given again. Where was this? What was the Mishkan? The Mishkan was a place where a Jewish person would be able to go and bring korbanot, bring offerings, bring sacrifices. So for either it could be repenting for their sins and things like that. This is an emotional acceptance of the law. And this corresponds by the fire. Why is the fire? Fire is the nefesh. Fire is the emotions. How does a person bring a korban? He brings a korban and a fire comes down from heaven to go and accept that korban. So that's the Mishkan was repeated again. This was corresponding to the emotions, to the fire. And finally, the Arvei Moab, the Torah was repeated again in the plains of Moab. What was the plains of Moab? This is by the waters of the Jordan. This is the waters corresponding to the physical acceptance of the Jewish people. So we see over here that the Torah was given in desert. It was given in, with fire, and it was given with water. Why? Corresponding to each different intellectual capacity, into each, corresponding part of the human being. Number 1, you have the intellect. The intellect, that was a desert. Then you have the fire, that's the emotion. And then you have the water, and that is the physical. And that corresponds to the times that it was given, 3 times. It was given by the desert, by the Har Sinai, intellectual. By the Mishkan, fire, that's emotion. And Arvei Moab, by the waters, that's a physical acceptance. Now listen to how it so beautifully plugs in. And this, what happens at each stage when you have a particular point where you have a chance of such high success, that's where the evil inclination is going to go and try to get you. So what happened? In each of these scenarios, the evil inclination went and tested the Jewish people in the sin that's corresponding that part, whether it be intellect, emotion, or physical. Let's look at Har Sinai. Har Sinai, we said that was in the desert. That corresponds to the intellectual part. What was the sin that the Jewish people did right after giving the Torah in the desert? They did the sin of the golden calf, the sin of idolatry, the sin of avodah zarah. That's an intellectual sin. That was a sin that they did in the intellect. At the Mishkan, what was the sin that they did? That was the sin of the meraglim, the sin of the spies. How the spies, when they went, there wasn't a thought-out reaction when they went into Eretz Yisrael and they saw the giant. It wasn't a thought. It was an emotional reaction. God said, you should go, we'll be able to take over it. But they went and they got scared, so it was an emotional reaction. So they sinned with their emotions. And finally, in the plains of Moab, in Arvei Moab, they went, and this was by the water, by the Jordan country. That by that water, that corresponds to the physicality. What were the sins that they did in the physicality in the Arvei Moab? That was the immoral acts of the women of Moab, the women of Moab over there. So we see over here that the Torah was given 3 times, corresponding 3 areas. But the evil inclination went and took those 3 parts and took that, and tested the Jewish people, and unfortunately get the Jewish people to fail in those areas. And these grave mistakes will remain with the Jewish nation until the coming of Mashiach. But we must remember that Shavuot, the day that's coming up, a day that we will re-experience that very first acceptance of the Torah at Har Sinai. At that moment, we have within us the ability to become perfect receptors, become perfect, oblivious to everything else other than the Word of God. And we may have made, averot, we may have made sins since then, with our bodies, with our intellects, and even with our emotions. But this day affords us the opportunity to go and sort of retune them for their intended task and bring ourselves back a little closer, to bring the world a little closer back to its final goal. And with that, we'll open up with any questions. Okay. Okay, so we have here a question. Okay, so if it's not the nation's problem, why are they jealous of them? I'm assuming that the question is that why are the nations of the world jealous of the Jewish people? I'm assuming if it's not, then please, you could go and you could retype that question. So why did the reason why, one of the reasons is that when the nations of the world, even though they didn't want to, subscribe to getting the Torah, they still, like it's sort of like they pass on an opportunity, but they don't want anybody else to get that opportunity. So if someone comes up to you with a business idea, you have to work hard, and you may have passed it up. Deep down, there's like an evil inclination inside of you that sort of be like, okay, fine, I don't want to have this to happen because I don't want to work so hard, but why should anybody else have this success either? So this is also one of the reasons that the nations of the world, they have a problem with the Jewish people being the chosen nation, being the nation that they, even though their work is hard for a Jew, and they have to do, but still it's sort of like a jealousy that comes up. Okay, next question is, the whole Torah was said at Har Sinai and then repeated twice more later on. What does the whole Torah refer to? Is that only the Aselta Dibros, or was it more than that? So it was whatever they had at that point in time, which was the majority of the Torah. So to what extent of how it wasn't just the 10 Commandments. It was definitely more than that. Okay. How long, the next question was, how long was the whole event of Matan Torah? So it started from the morning with the sounds and the noises and the shaking and all of that, and by mid-afternoon, it finished. So it took, quite a few hours, probably a big chunk of the day. Okay. The next question is, based on your topic, the day the world has changed forever. Can you provide any examples on how the secular law is derived from the Torah? And then thank you for the comment on that. Okay. So now what's very interesting is that the way that the world works is they sort of like take things from different from different nationalities, and this is where you have, I don't want to start bringing down, like, let's say Buddhism or any of those far east religions. And what they did is that they sort of like chulent pot. Basically, they had one idea in one religion, and another day another religion, and then the third religion came up and says, they sort of like handpick. I'll take this, I'll take this, I'll take this, and they sort of put it together. So when the Jewish people got the Torah from Har Sinai, they received the Torah. But then it stayed with the Jewish people. It didn't start getting picked. Where it started getting picked, at least at a larger scale, is where Christianity and Islam sort of branched off. And when you see from it, Christianity and Islam sort of took out a bunch of things from the Torah, and they implemented it into their own thing. For example, in Islam, you're not allowed to eat pig. Why shouldn't they eat pig? Like, what's the big deal? Because the Torah says you're not supposed to eat pig. And Christianity, there's so many different ideas and concepts that they went and they took from the Torah and they implemented into their religion. And that happens from that, and it also happens from an ethical standpoint as well. That's from a religious standpoint, but the ethical standpoint also, the Jewish people also had a very big impact on the ethical way that the world went. So the next question is, that people that were blind and deaf were able to see and hear, and the answer is yes. They were able to go, they were healed from everything. Lame, blind, deaf, they were able to completely heal. So yeah, so the question that was asked, is there a specific sefel that mentions the three association that I mentioned with the intellect, emotion, and the body with Matan Torah? So yes, this is based off what I said the last part of the shiur, that was based off the Shem Mishmuel. The Shem Mishmuel is, I love the Shem Mishmuel. Ugh, it's unbelievable. There is an English version on it, and that's not the full, the full translation of the Shem Mishmuel, but it does have a large, it has select, concepts of the Shem Mishmuel. It's on the Parshiot and the holidays. Strongly recommend everybody to buy it. I loved it. Like, as growing up, I remember, like, I would read that, like, every single week. That would be like Ma'at Torah. Like, I was connected to Shem Mishmuel. I loved it. Okay. Yes, Shem Mishmuel on Parsha and holidays, correct. I don't know what's the, how the cover looks, but there is an English version out there. I have it somewhere in my house, but I use it so much that my covers are now rubbed out. So yeah, I can't even if I find it, I won't be able to show it to you. You won't be able to see it. Any other questions? Oh, okay, we have here. Okay, in this week's Parasha, Hashem made a selection among the tribes to confirm the army in Israel, all men 20 years and upward. The exceptions are the Levim. Two questions. One, does the Kohanim are also exempt? So yes, the Shevet of Levi, Kohanim come from the Shevet of Levi. As well. And the second question, is there any similarity in modern days in which the ultra-Orthodox and the Yeshiva Brachim being exempt from today's Israel secular army? So that is a question that is heated, especially if you're in Israel. Whew, that's a dangerous question to go and to ask. So there is, a concept that, and it's not only a concept, it's a foundation, that what the people that are sitting and learning Torah protect Israel more than the soldiers. Not to say that the soldiers are not doing an amazing job and they're protecting and it's needed, whatever it is, of course. But the concept of what the people that are sitting and learning Torah all day, they are actually helping the army just as much as the army is doing it. Now, for people that are new to religion, it's very hard to comprehend this concept. But from a spiritual standpoint, they have protection. They're giving protection to the, to the nation at whole. Okay. The next question is, you mentioned that Levi brought the Shekhinah closer. What about the other Shvatim? They didn't help. The Midrash, if I'm not mistaken, that says specifically on the Shevet of Levi. The Shevet of Levi was on a spiritual level that was different than everybody else, and that was even from the time of when they were in Egypt. The Shevet of Levi were ones that were not working with everybody else. All the other Shvatim were working. So the Shevet of Levi were focused on spiritual achievements even from the beginning. Okay. That seems that we had answered the final question. So if there are no other final questions, we'll end it off over here. And with that, I will wish you an amazing, uplifting, and joyful holiday of the upcoming Shavuot.